Good afternoon, everyone. Jeffrey, thanks a lot for your interesting talk. And as a CMO, I'm also going through this transformation with big data and creativity. And we, in Yandex.Taxi, we also do have a big creative team, both in product design and in product development, and also in marketing. We do have an in-house creative team with around 40 people, art directors, copywriters, designers, producers. And every day we're also thinking about creativity and the way big data is changing it, and the way it is changing the creative process. And your thought about gut feeling and about the instinct really resonates with what I'm thinking, because definitely the experience of the designer, the observations of the designer are real data, and probably it's not even less important than the big data. But how would you persuade engineers, managers, project managers, how would you persuade them that the gut feeling is really the right thing? How would you persuade that the gut feeling of a creative professional, of a copywriter, or of an UX writer is something you can believe?
Well, I think it's a hard process, and there's no easy way to do this. I think excellent storytelling always helps, of course. I mean, everyone loves a great story, and you get people incentivized inside of the business to move against these, different territories that you want to explore. But I think ultimately creatives are going to have to, fully find the data that's going to be able to back them up and take them to these new territories. I think a lot of them actually will have the opportunity, I think, to explore data in a different way. And again, if you're using that as the fuel that drives the experience, it requires a little bit less of the data relationship.
Because usually a product manager would say, okay, let's do an SBS test, a side-by-side, or an A/B test, and see what solution wins.
Yeah, well, I think, going back to the Watson ad builder we were talking about, and there are other things like this. It's the personalization moment that allows, I think, creatives to avoid some of these pitfalls even. So if you can know that you're building your creative that in a way that it's dynamic, it's going to be one-to-one relationship with someone, it becomes less about having to A/B test. It becomes less about having the need to drive these decisions on a big data level when that relationship, again, is down at a person-to-person level. The story is person to person.
It's a great point. I've been also thinking that actually the conversation that helps us to reset the entire mind of the team is when you talk about the long-term metrics. Because it's definitely not only about the clicks and views, right? Not only about this 2% of conversion you can make right now with an A/B test, but about some brand trust and the quality of the product, the quality that the customer expects from your product in a long-term perspective. And that's probably the way we are trying to persuade the teams. And they start thinking that we actually think about some more tangible goals, less tangible goals that are actually influencing both the elasticity, the price elasticity, that are influencing the brand retention, and that's definitely something that can help to persuade.
I mean, and how do you find that actually works for you guys? Like, is there a process for that you guys go through?
We usually we always do side by side, because we're a very technocratic company, and it's Yandex, and we always use our technologies and A/B tests. But that's the conflict we are facing every day. Like, what's going to win? This concept, this creative concept, or the other creative concept? And it's definitely the observations and the gut feeling. What we are trying to do, we're trying to build now different econometric models that can help us to actually measure the brand influence, the influence of different brand attributes, like for Yandex.Taxi, for instance, safety, trust, the quality of the service, and we're trying to see how it can impact the retention in terms of GMV, in terms of money. It's a really hard task to measure it, but still we're trying to move towards this kind of calculations to make our arguments more persuasive. But I think the only thing that wins now is storytelling. Storytelling and emotions, the way you try to persuade the team, is always something that stands up front.
Yeah, stands the test of time.
Yeah, definitely.
No, but it is interesting because a lot of marketing organizations are moving to the data-inspired focus, right? Like internally, everything starts with the media and data brief. What insights are being gleaned from that and how that's being transferred down into opportunities for creative. So I think also a lot of agencies are developing new relationships with some of these larger companies who are taking this approach and trying to get in and have a ground floor relationship where they allow media, data insights, and creative to come together and build this stuff.
Exactly, and I think that's probably one of the most complicated part in the relationships between agencies and companies right now, because the companies are not really willing to share data externally, right? And basically that's why lots of in-house creatives are winning right now, because they have the data inside. And I think the very important part for all agencies is to just try to build this right process of sharing data, of exporting data to the agency, of trust, of building the trust between the agency and the client. Because when you're every day drowned into these figures, definitely you can build a long-term strategy, a long-term creative strategy.
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, I think it's interesting too. I think this will come back around because, as we were looking before, 85% of these efforts are failing right now across the board. Not, some companies do better than others, but in summary, 85% of these big data efforts fail. And so I think, the creative agencies have a great opportunity now to come back and bring that qualitative assessment of, what the data is doing and what can be done with it up to the front of the conversation, opposed to down in, at production level, which is much more myopic, much more focused on one particular area.
It's an interesting point because you say that 85% fail, but then you showed like three examples, which you believe in. So why do you believe in these tactics if you actually say that most of them fail?
Well, it's not that the data can't, big data can fail because data is just data, right? It's the people who do something with it that have the opportunity in front of them. And that's what's not being done. I think what's being lost is people are taking the data and using it as a backup for, a bunch of things that they don't want to deal with. If the data says this, let's do this, because no one can get in trouble. Now, I mean, people are, when you see data that really works, it really works. And it works in so many, interesting ways. It works to, power those AI experiences, and that's the kind of thing that when AI does get involved with some of these things, it creates the opportunity to have dynamic conversation with people. So it moves data from being something static to something dynamic. So I just don't think it's just one aspect of these things. There's creative with big data. There's big data all by itself. There's big data without, qualitative assessment. And these are the places where big data fails.
You also mentioned about personalized creative or creative based on personalized data. I really think that it's going to be a much bigger trend every day with the companies, and we see amazing campaigns. For example, my favorite example is Spotify, who are doing lots of creative campaigns offline based at their user habits, like I don't know how many times someone listened to Ed Sheeran's song, or how many times you listened to a Goodbye song. What's wrong with you, guy? So we also do a lot. We have a tradition, like every end of the year, we do like a traditional New Year campaign with ride-sharing statistics, how many rides you've made, what kind of passenger you've been, how generous you were, leaving tips, and it always drives huge viral effect, and it's very humanized approach. Maybe you can give some more examples of personalization tactics, maybe from your favorite everyday apps, the apps you use every day.
Yeah, I mean, actually, funny enough, when you were talking about that, I actually thought of a wonderful ad I just saw from Tinder, and it was actually a static Klingon, I can't remember. It was in the middle of a city, but it showed all of the people of that city's favorite destinations to travel to and what they thought was exotic, and so you can get in front of it and then take your photo as if this was going to be your Tinder photo, so people could think that you were in Paris or wherever was the city, the romance of choice. And I thought it was such a clever way to bring something static and very traditional to a really dynamic place with data. Yeah.
Some more examples, maybe. Yeah, we are trying to always bring in some context or situation content in the app, like building a personal connection with the user, and sometimes because that and the problem that we are facing, the data without creativity is actually nothing interesting. It's boring, right? And you always you invest lots of time working together with product analytics, with analytics team, just to build to build a story out of this, and it requires lots of competencies.
It requires a lot. I actually think that data visualizer, the person who does this, I think that role is just going to evolve, and there's going to be so much more for them on a creative front to be able to explore what insights can be poured out of each of these individual moments. But I also think as these tools enhance, it will less be about specialists having to do this particular thing, and it will be more out into the hands of creatives who work at agencies, work in production companies, or out in the field really making this stuff happen. And they're going to be able to just dive in and do data explorations on their own and be able to find really cool insights. And then that way they can draw their own sense-nonsense relationship between the things that are around them. And actually, going back to what you were saying before, I think I think a lot of the tools, around personalization in general, I think a lot of those are going to get enhanced as well, taking away from data insights being something that are a hindrance and turning them into dynamic storytelling tools for creatives. So.
Cool. Yeah, we're also always trying to search for new scenarios. For instance, when a person is trying to book a ride, we are trying to predict what's going to be his next step, what's going to be his next scenario. Can we order, if you're going tonight to a theater, can we order you a more comfortable ride? Can we order you some other experience? Can we offer you a restaurant? Mm-hmm. And what about the team? What kind of creatives you have in your team? How do you hire people? Where do you find them? What kind of profiles you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think the biggest shift for us has been to, and I know I keep saying it over and over again, but is really create this creative consultancy mentality, to really bring in creatives into other areas of the business and let them play. And that means building their expertise in design for new territories, if they're going to be working in healthcare, really help reinvent how healthcare can work. And then the other side of that is training those traditional consultants and those traditional technologists to think and really feel and breathe like a creative. So at IBM, we have enterprise design thinking as a methodology, and we've trained roughly 1/4, I don't remember the exact number, which is almost 100,000 folks, to think about design, to think about creativity, and bring that as an approach to their business, but then also bring in that creative director and bring in those people to further that, to bring their unique insight to that table.
Do you have some professionals with some unique, specific expertise?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing for us has been, obviously everyone's been on the UX, trail, so trying to mix UX with almost everything. I think for us also, creative technology has been a big focus that we're still in the early days of, is really training developers and finding developers who can think with the heart of a creative and really put that at the center of their being. That's been a big focus as well.
What do you mean by creative technology? Like the developers that can code in a certain manner? Or?
Yeah, I think it's an abused term. It's been one applied to me before, for sure, but I think it's really people who have the ability to code, and this is just my personal opinion. It's people who have the ability to code, but take the approach and think the way creatives do. It's when code becomes similar to Photoshop for those people. So a designer could be a designer without being creative, right? But creativity is an attribute. So I think, but it's also a process. So it's bringing that to the table for the developer.
do you have probably some special training techniques that give the most top results to build creativity in the team?
You know, it's been. I think it's something that we're still working on. To be honest, I could lie and say it's something we have like totally figured out, but we don't. I mean, I think the way the business is moving so fast and changing so fast that we're trying to get more generalists, in essence, who were specialists, that rather than go the other way around. So really training people on the individual sectors that they might be applied to or might be working in, instead of trying to train them on a particular skill set.
That's actually a great point, because what I'm seeing now as well is the mix that everything is being transformed from just being a marketing or just being a product design into it's really hard to share responsibility, because apps become media. Yeah, apps become your main instrument of marketing, and it's really hard to put the line between the product design and between the marketing communication. And that's something what really moves us to hire generalist professionals, and also to hire people with a diverse background. For instance, we have some guys on the team who are theater set designers or industrial designers, and all this collaboration gives us a more humanized result and more creative perspective on what we do.
Yeah, and I think for us, I think too, where it's like with our generalists, I think we tend to lean in on our agency partners, to get specialized activities in certain areas. So we might lean into a production company as we go forward, dealing with product design. We may, work with a creative agency as we go forward and build out marketing strategy in a particular division. I think there's a hefty amount of work that we do with the agencies side by side to really build out some of these capabilities, rather than try to do every single thing internal to us.
Exactly. We also do outsource some specific skills. I guess I have the last question. Do you think that some of the creative functions can be replaced by artificial intelligence?
Do I think so? Oh, man, that's one of the ones where everyone boos at you. I have a really interesting relationship to that. I think we're always imbuing kind of our soul into the things that we make a little bit, right? And I think that it's not so much that it's replacing what we do, but it is augmenting our task. But I think the thing that's contentious is why we do it. I think very much we look at psychological space, and when we're making work as a final product, as something that just dies as soon as it's done. It's just something that's static and lives there. I think these things are starting to grow and live on, and they're becoming more than what they used to be. They're taking on a life of their own. They're taking on behaviors and personalities and characters. So I think that psychological space is kind of reversing now. I think we're now looking at a world where we make stuff for it to live. And so we should be proud of the things that we make and have a little bit of a lifetime of their own.
And maybe we're moving into collaborative art and driving more creative professionals to share not just the final result of their work, but just to share the process of work. And I guess that's what we really need to drive more new solutions, to drive more solutions how data can help us to grow business, to grow brands.
Yeah, and I think it gives, I think to your point, I think that's an excellent point. I think, artists now have an opportunity to get involved with how people are actually, experiencing a product, as small ones or really big ones, and it doesn't have to be a devaluation of what their work is. So that becomes an interesting change or an interesting shift as well.
Yeah, and gets an added value, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk.
Well,
Guys,
you.
let's applause Jeffrey. Thank you.